All right, welcome, Tori. A little introduction. Tori is from Shift Concussion Management. Tori completed her academic journey at Brock University, completing her master's in Professional Kinesiology in 2017. Tori took an interest in concussion while doing her research in her master's, as she was moved by the unique presentation of each individual's journey. As a Niagara native, Tori continues to contribute to concussion research with the Niagara region and Brock University as a research investigator. Tori's interests are centered around gender-based violence, and she volunteers for a residential safe house for survivors of sex trafficking and provides concussion programming, as well as attends weekly PINKConcussion Task calls. Tori continues to grow professionally through continuing education courses through the SOAR project, American Psychiatric Association, Google Analytics, Government of Ontario, and attending workshops and staying up to date on the new clinical applications in the literature. Welcome, Tori.
Thank you very much. It's such a kind introduction with so much information. Just before I get started here, can everybody see my slides okay?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Is it like a speaker view or you can just see the full slide?
I just see speaker notes right now. It's white, and then off to the side on the left, I can see your slide.
Okay, well, I don't want you guys to see that. Okay, just give me a second here and try and get that reset. No, there's always a little bit of fun when you're on here.
Perfect, that's great.
That's better now, okay. Okay, great. So thank you again for that kind introduction. Today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about two different topics. One of them is sort of a passion project of mine. And then the other one is geared more towards kind of like some action items that we can kind of take from today. So it's not just everybody hearing about something that I'm super interested in. So as you can see today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about intimate partner violence, as well as healthcare advocacy. So thank you, Claire, for that introduction again. A little bit about me. I just want to expand on a few things just so you guys can kind of see where I'm coming from. So I did complete my master's and my undergrad at Brock University. In September, I will be joining the SOAR project actually as a PhD student. And they will, or this project is based around intimate partner violence and brain injury. So kind of why I wanted to present a little bit about that today. In addition to this project, I also work with Alora House. They are a residential safe house based out of Guelph. And then I work with women to do concussion programming weekly. Additionally, I also work at Shift Concussion Management. So that's probably where a lot of people know me from. Prior to this work from home 3.0, I had kind of a functional rehab lead there, but as kind of COVID and lockdown has prevailed, I've worked now more remotely. So now I work just from home doing kind of the behind the scenes work. So I'm really grateful to be able to join you all today. I'll post kind of all that information in the chat later, just so if anybody wanted a bit more information about any of the topics or any of the projects going on, they could find out that information, as well as my email if anybody had any questions or wanted some more resources or had a few questions that they didn't feel comfortable asking today. So I'll post that later in the chat, so don't feel like you have to frantically write it down. So just to get started, so what is intimate partner violence? So I think it's really important to kind of establish the difference between intimate partner violence and domestic violence. People kind of use these terms interchangeably, but there is kind of a distinct difference. Intimate partner violence is focused more around, obviously, an intimate partner, so a husband, an ex-partner and an ex-wife, that kind of situation, whereas domestic violence could be anybody that's in the home. So it could be, a grandma, a son, an aunt and uncle, those kinds of things. So there is kind of that distinguished or that difference with the intimacy. Unfortunately, 1 in 3 women will experience IPV or intimate partner violence in their lifetime. And we do know that 92% of those will also suffer a brain injury. So I thought it'd be really important today to kind of come on here and talk about that, as because of the prevalence in this community and because of the nature of the Brain Injury Association, there is kind of that correlation. We do know that violence, unfortunately, favors the marginalized. So we see these numbers drastically increase or an overrepresentation, particularly in the BIPOC, queer, and then visible or physical minorities. IPV can take on a number of different forms. It can be physical, verbal, emotional, sexual, economic, financial. But obviously, the form that we're focusing on is the physical. So just to continue on here, so IPV is a brain injury, a brain injury is an alteration in brain function caused by external forces or a reduction in oxygen supply. So the second half is actually really new, just because we now know that strangulation or asphyxiation does result in that kind of hypoxic injury where there is an oxygen reduction in the brain that can also result in a brain injury. This can happen from a variety of causes. I mean, some of them listed there, obviously quite intense and can be kind of triggering as well. But I think it's important to kind of establish this, because I think when we think of brain injury, I mean, maybe not in this group, but with the general population, we think of that classic like motor vehicle accident. We think of like that concussion in sport. And I think it is important to kind of note that there's so many other ways that we can get a brain injury. And I do notice specifically when talking to survivors and women, that there's kind of this like aha moment that like, oh, I don't need to be hit in the head. You know, it could be any of these other various forms. And that's kind of why, again, you kind of put in that triggering information, but really important information as well.
Tori,
yeah.
could you just slow down a little bit?
Am I screaming?
So excited, and it's an interesting topic, but you need to just slow down just a touch.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I actually have these little notes that say go slow.
Thank you.
Okay. So sorry. So we'll move on to some of the signs and symptoms. So some of these that may be included with brain injury, again, headaches, neck pain, dizziness, or loss of balance, nausea, again, like blurred vision or seeing stars, sensitivity to light or sound, ringing in the ears or also tinnitus, confusion, fogginess, and then some of the more delayed effects that can include frustration, irritability, concentration or memory loss, sadness, anxiety or nervousness, fatigue, and then trouble sleeping. I kind of separate these two because I find that the top ones are sort of like the obvious ones, the things that we immediately associate with a head injury or a concussion. And the bottom ones are the ones that are kind of the ones we don't think about, the ones that kind of hurt us in silence, or kind of that invisible injury. And then again, particularly with this population, kind of those later ones are the ones that kind of contribute to lots of other problems going forward. So like brain injury is frequently associated with structural and functional changes in brain structure. The really important ones are the ones that mediate emotion and self-regulation, in addition to the stress and the disability that these brain injuries can cause. So, you know, disruptions of memory, executive function, verbal information processing, in addition to some of those symptoms that I just kind of mentioned, the frustration and the irritability, the concentration or memory loss, sadness, kind of those anxieties. I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with the fight or flight response, or the autonomic nervous system. But following a brain injury in this population, or particularly those where the like mechanism of injury is quite traumatic, we have a response called freezing. So it's kind of like fight, flight, or freeze. So this is another uncontrollable reaction through the autonomic nervous system that happens because of the trauma, similar to one of like sexual assault. A person becomes physically incapable of resisting or speaking up. Because of the nature of these injuries, again, the symptoms that occur can be difficult to distinguish from other symptoms. Some of those similar to PTSD, depression, again, anxiety, like we had previously mentioned, and then substance use as well is frequently common in this population. So just to kind of expand on some of the alterations to the central nervous system, and that autonomic nervous system as well. Recent research has demonstrated that survivors are a lot more likely to have alterations to their central nervous system due to the repetitive nature of abuse. There's this really common statistic that goes around that a woman or a survivor doesn't leave until the 7th time. So it really kind of highlights that repetitive nature of what they're enduring. Current findings link these alterations in emotional states, such as, again, like that fatigue, that anxiety, the drowsiness, that just not feeling right, the aspects of memory and cognition, for example, difficulty concentrating or difficulty with short-term memory. And then again, like IPV is associated with several of those PTSD clusters, hyperarousal, emotional numbing. We know that these 4 different parts of the central nervous system are involved in a lot of our higher cognitive functioning, like decision-making processes with the prefrontal cortex, regulation of hormones and that autonomic function, that fight, flight, freeze in the hypothalamus, emotional processing and fear responses in the amygdala, and then interpretation of events and emotional responses in the hippocampus. So really sciencey, but again, just really showing kind of the multifaceted nature of this injury, and then kind of that added layer of the trauma from the intimate partner violence. So I guess I did go superbly fast through that at the beginning. Was there anybody, again, I can't really see the chat, but wanted to kind of unmute themselves and ask any questions, maybe about the first couple slides that I jumped through before I move on?
Yeah, Tori, I've got a couple questions. Linda here.
Sure.
You talked about the prevalence of having a brain injury as a result of an intimate partner violence. How many do you think are undetected? So someone who does have an abusive relationship that doesn't realize that they're actually have a brain injury? Like, what do you think the percentages are that they're unaware?
That's a great question. I mean, I don't have actual numbers, but we do know that underreporting in this population is so severely intense. I mean, in the intimate partner world, in the sex work world, in so many of these kind of closed doors places, these things are happening and then not getting disclosed. I mean, there's so many barriers to people sharing, obviously, like shame, sometimes money, control, power. There's all of these factors. So it's hard to say, but it's a great point. I mean, if everybody was to disclose or a national survey was to go out, yeah, I'm sure those numbers will be a lot higher than what we see, unfortunately.
Yeah. And how do people right now, how do they get assessed that they do have a brain injury? Is it self-assessment, or is there services that are provided that
That's a great question as well. A lot of women, or a lot of the resources that are available to women are typically through a shelter. So if somebody was to go and kind of get those like acute services, and there'd be some type of like risk assessment. In Canada, unfortunately, in North America in general, there really needs to be this shift, because there are so many things going undetected, and to kind of get that diagnosis or that treatment, someone has to really go out of their comfort zone or out of their way to let somebody know, like, hey, this happened.
Right.
So I think it's more of like a structural change, like top-down policies, procedures kind of approach to kind of get the ball rolling, because right now it really isn't great.
Okay, great, thanks.
No problem. Any other questions before I hop along? Okay, and again, if there is any questions, you can just post them in the chat and I'll get to them once I'm kind of finished up here. Okay, so now this brings me on to my second topic, which is healthcare advocacy. So kind of different ends of the spectrum here, but I really do like to highlight the prevalence of IPV in the brain injury community, just because I always think like if somebody takes one thing from this conversation that I said and it helps out one person, or they have those difficult conversations, then I'll kind of take any opportunity to throw the information out there. So I appreciate everybody listening to me scream. You're right, I get very, very, very excited. So on to healthcare advocacy. So a healthcare advocate is an individual who provides direct and personalized services to a patient as they navigate the healthcare system. Advocates also engage in activities that promote health and access to healthcare. They're involved in a variety of different healthcare related areas and come from various backgrounds and expertise. Some of these include nurses, physicians, physician assistants, social workers, case managers, hospital administrators, the Brain Injury Association. But today I really want to highlight that the biggest healthcare advocate is yourself. So what do I mean by that? We don't always have somebody there to advocate for ourselves. Sometimes we have to make those important calls or go to appointments on our own. And it's important to know that the most important or the best advocate is going to be ourselves. I'm going to kind of go into a little bit more detail in these 5 things I have here. So first, start with the appointment and ask questions. So it's so important to ask about benefits, side effects, disadvantages of a recommended treatment plan. You should always feel comfortable asking your medical provider questions. These questions can be based on your own personal research, test results you were given. I always encourage people to kind of write down the questions ahead of time. This is especially important if you have a short appointment scheduled. For example, I know at Shift, our initial assessment is 60 minutes, but after that, subsequent sessions are 30 minutes. So those 30 minutes can obviously go by quick. So kind of writing down some of the questions that you have ahead of time rather than on the fly or thinking about them in the appointment can be a really great way to kind of take advantage and advocate for yourself while you're there. I think it's important to note too, not to be afraid to explore other options. If you're continually feeling ignored or if you're simply not having your needs met, this could look like sending an email to your provider, letting them know you're not satisfied, or asking for a referral somewhere else. Another kind of takeaway is remembering to take the time to kind of do a quick Google search before you go, or kind of that week leading up to your appointment. If you can't be on the screens for too long, or kind of searching through Google can be kind of that energy drainer that you maybe don't want. But trying to read like some biographies online, familiarize yourself with the person you'll be seeing before you actually get there. So again, it kind of like eliminates that time constraint once you're there. 2, arm yourself with information. So a really big one, especially in Canada or Ontario, is knowing how your insurance works. Obviously, you're well within your rights to ask your insurance provider what they'll pay and what is and isn't included. If you find yourself speaking to someone who says they aren't sure about your coverage, making sure that you're talking to someone who can give you solid answers, or you're asking that person kind of pass you on to somebody who can answer. That can be the difference between $5 and $50 and $500. So it's always important to ask those questions. The more educated you can be before you walk in the door, the better. Again, you might not always feel like strong enough to do a Google search, or maybe it is, again, that energy drainer, but just kind of trying to block in a little bit of time or scheduling it in your day, it can really pay off in the long run. 3, keeping your own records. So I find this one super helpful. Being a healthcare professional myself, when somebody shows up and you notice that they've kind of taken the time to collect their own medical records, it shows that they have kind of investment in their health. And it's a great way to kind of ensure that, say you're switching medical providers, or you've seen a specialist and you're going back to your doctor, or any of those own things, keeping your own records will ensure nothing kind of gets lost in the shuffle. It kind of goes for the same as medical bills as well, kind of like making sure that you're keeping track as much as it feels like it shouldn't necessarily be on your shoulders. Again, it can be the difference between that $5 and that $50 and that $500. So I mean, trying to keep your own records is super important, and especially now in the digital age. I mean, we have our phones, our iPads, our computers. You know, we can voice to text if looking at a screen is too much, but that's a really big one. Getting a second opinion. So unfortunately, miscommunication between patients and physicians, or primary care providers, specialists, or even different healthcare professionals is really common. Even if you're comfortable with the diagnosis or the treatment plan you've received, staying informed is the most important tool you have in your toolbox. So getting a second opinion, or kind of bouncing that idea off a different professional can, again, kind of keep you the most informed. And then the last one is calling for backup. So don't be afraid to reach out to friends, loved ones, family members if you're feeling overwhelmed. Having a well-informed someone by your side to advocate for you not only gives you an additional resource for questions and answers, but it does give you that much more confidence to advocate for yourself. One of the most important things we tell people coming into assessment at Shift is bringing in a family member or the caregiver that's with you to take notes. Again, ask questions, and then to also have a better understanding of what you're going through. I mean, so often we see somebody come in and the parents or the loved one is sitting in the waiting room, and we're like, no, come in. And by the end of the 1 hour assessment, they're all walking out just so, I mean, one, probably a little tired because we know they can be a lot, but also kind of enlightened. It's kind of like they never really recognized what that partner or that parent or that person was going through, and kind of having a medical professional or somebody that's kind of a leader in their field kind of tell them or help the person with the brain injury to kind of communicate those things. It tends to be really helpful. So yeah, I mean, again, that's a lot of information, but I think, again, it's really important to kind of take as much as you can on yourself. I know, like, we don't always have like the energy for it, but just even if you're taking like a few small things or asking those questions can really go a long way. So just a quick little question to kind of break it up. Can anybody share any myths they debunked about brain injury by doing their own research, or maybe a fact they didn't know and found out through their own research? You can unmute or share in the chat. I can't really see the chat, so if nobody has anything, I'll move on. I'll give you a few seconds.
We have one answer in the chat, and it says you can't heal from it.
Oh. Okay, you can't. Okay, good. That you're correct. That is a good myth. I took that the wrong way for a second. That's a really good one, actually. I think, you know, I kind of said the Google search before, but it can be a blessing and a curse. You know, sometimes you can get the right information, you can get the wrong information, and having somebody tell you that you can't heal from it, and then being able to go home and be like, hey, wait. It really kind of highlights, again, like that second opinion too. I mean, if you hear something from someone you don't like, you got to go somewhere else, because there's more people out there and there's so much knowledge. I mean, you shouldn't be getting any closed door answers in this day and age. So I'm glad you're able to find that out. Any other ones?
The one that I hear from our group quite often is this professional doesn't think that treatment works. So, you know, one of our members might go and say, oh, I think I need to go and see this practitioner, a vision therapist, for example. And the next practitioner you see goes, well, I don't believe in that. So having professionals disagree about which is effective treatment for a brain injury.
Yeah. And that's so challenging. I mean, we hear that all the time too. And I mean, obviously Shift is really lucky because we're quite multidisciplinary, and we do kind of really highlight that collaborative approach. But there are so many people out there that are kind of stuck in their silos. And I mean, I know it's hard in this kind of group to kind of say, okay, well, if you get the wrong answer there, go here, and what's the right answer? But I think that finding that collaborative location or a place that has many facility, or not necessarily facilities, but many professionals working in one facility is a great way to kind of be like, okay, well, they obviously communicate, they obviously collaborate, and obviously the hope is that we're not kind of knocking our other professionals, but I hear that one a lot too, unfortunately.
So another comment in the chat says being told it's all in your head or labeled somatic.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you're here because it's not the truth, but yeah, that's another one we hear all the time, that it's all in your head. And I think it goes back to that invisible injury too, right? It's like a lot of these symptoms and signs and symptoms that we're having or people are having are, you know, it's not that cast, it's not somebody in crutches, it's not necessarily always like somebody in a wheelchair, something that we can physically see. And that's unfortunate to hear those things from healthcare professionals, and obviously coming from shifts too, with like kind of that educational background too. It just makes me want to shove our courses kind of in their face. But yeah, I'm glad you continue to do that research.
All right, another comment says, that's the worst, specifically our insurance providers.
Yeah, yeah, I hear that. Yeah. I feel like insurance providers are kind of on the mend. I think that the more they kind of see these things coming through or kind of down the pipe, the more that's going to start to change. But yeah, I mean, they're not necessarily always healthcare providers, and they have kind of the working for the man mentality sometimes. So sometimes that's a bit of a fight. I think that's in that situation too, it's important to kind of have a good team of professionals behind you, or a good support system, because they can kind of advocate for you as well. But with the insurance companies, that's always, we'll have to go back and write down those 5 tips for advocating, because they're tough sometimes. They're really tough.
Another comment says doctors still give the old advice of resting in a dark room at first.
Yeah. If they're from the Guelph-Wellington area, they can take shift course for free. But yeah, again, I think that's just another thing, that as they kind of continue to get this information and kind of continue to learn a bit more about it, and as the stigma kind of changes around mental health and concussions and brain injury, hopefully that changes. Again, that's just, you gotta advocate for yourself and maybe go somewhere else, because I get so frustrated with that one, because I feel like that was debunked in like the early 2000s, and for like doctors to still be saying those things is quite frustrating.
And finally, so the comment that was stated about practitioners saying it's all in your head. So another comment on that saying it's hard because it always comes from the neurologist.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Neurologists are, you wait so long to get into that when you get there, you're kind of so excited, and then to be kind of knocked right down. I think we put a lot of weight in neurologists' hands, and not to say that they're not great professionals, because obviously they are and they do great work, but they're not always the ones that are kind of like frontline, seeing you like day to day, or kind of with you along the journey. So I think for that one, just hopefully got like broad shoulders and just kind of take it in stride. I mean, I know it's easier said than done, but that's when that support system really comes in handy, because, you know, like, again, you wait so long to get in there, and then you do when you hear something that's really kind of takes the air right out of your tires. So, you know.
We have one more comment.
Yeah, please.
All right, it says, I wouldn't say this is a myth, but a lot of what is textbook about brain injuries is not always the case for everyone.
I couldn't agree more. And brain injuries are so unique. And I think that, I don't want to say that's why I love them, because I also hate them, but there's so many different variables. I mean, there's like the unique individual, and then there's so many different mechanisms of injury. It's hard if you're like to go by the textbook. I mean, every single person is going to be different, and I would like to hope that people that work in this field kind of got into it for that reason. But yeah, I'm gonna hop onto the next slide, but definitely at the end we can kind of circle back to this one. I'm gonna have a few more questions too, so this is really great. I appreciate everybody kind of hopping in and not just having a nap. Let me see if I can get the next slide here. There we go. So the next thing I wanted to talk a little bit about was managing barriers and kind of what to do if nothing changes. So some of the barriers that I was kind of wrapping my head around today, unmet health needs, delays in receiving appropriate care, financial burdens, physical barriers or accessibility barriers, any others that we can think of. And again, you can kind of just post them in the chat. I actually think I might be able to see the chat. Oh yeah, I can see the chat. Any other barriers that anybody can think of? Language, yeah, absolutely. And then I had a few more here. So language, like kind of Linda had said, the cultural barriers, complex health insurance, like we had kind of already talked about, familiarity with healthcare. So I mean, if someone's like a recent immigrant to Canada, not really understanding how the healthcare works here, and then systemic barriers as well. All different kind of things that kind of lay that extra layer. And I think too, like with brain injury, I mean, we're already kind of have so many new things that we're dealing with that we never had to deal with before. What do we got here? How you present, but it's really, yeah. Oh, COVID, that's a good one. Yeah, invisible barriers, absolutely, Rebecca. That's a great point. Yeah, COVID's a huge barrier, and I think, I mean, I don't want to rabbit hole into COVID, but I think we're going to be seeing this kind of snowball effect for years to come, and I hope that kind of organizations and from like a provincial and federal level, we really kind of hop on that, so it doesn't, we can keep it kind of here. I would love to be able to in a few years like laugh about it rather than still be kind of suffering. But yeah, that's a great point. And then I have a few more, yep, yep. A few more questions. So can anyone share a barrier that they faced and how they overcame it? Or maybe didn't overcome it. Again, you can post that in the chat, or if you want, feel free to unmic or unmute.
Great question.
I had to take a positive spin. I feel like this past weekend there was lots of barriers. I don't know if we want to go down the government rabbit hole either, but.
Well, I mean, it's interesting if you don't perceive, if you've overcome something, maybe you don't perceive it as a barrier.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, weather. Yeah.
The other thing I was going to say transportation as well as a barrier.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. Yeah.
I find one barrier is your family.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's where it can really be important for them to like come to appointments with you, or especially now, I mean, Zoom and virtual care has made healthcare and access a little bit more accessible, but just kind of hearing or letting somebody else kind of tell family like kind of what you're going through can be really helpful. Like I said, I see so many people with that kind of like aha moment once they leave, just hearing somebody else and kind of having a better understanding of the injury. Yeah, family's a big one. Yeah. Yeah, people believing or understanding what symptoms are like. Yeah, that is a big barrier. And then if you don't mind, could you think of maybe what you could do to kind of help mitigate that? Like how could we kind of put that back on people to kind of help better understand? I always like to use the analogy of kind of a cast, because people kind of always get that. You see somebody with a cast and you automatically know like, oh, that, they might need a hand holding their groceries or something like that. I use that analogy all the time. Insurance companies, big ones, yeah. Disability, finally got a settlement, good, there we go. That's how we overcome it, nice. We move on to the next question here. Has anyone ever received a healthcare diagnosis or treatment plan they didn't agree with? And then if so, kind of what they did about it. Again, you can kind of answer in the chat, yes or no, if you don't want to. No, everybody liked their treatment plan. No, we had any issues. It makes me happy. Fair. Too much to write. I mean, you're welcome to unmute, but that's fair. Yeah.
I think there was a time early in Michael's diagnosis where some of the OT recommendations we didn't quite understand or agree with. And you kind of scratch your head and go, well, maybe we should focus over here instead and see if that helps.
Yeah. And I think that's a good way to put it too. You kind of like pivot if there's something that you don't really agree with or something that you don't really understand, then you kind of put it somewhere else or put your energy somewhere else where you know that there's something like you better understand or maybe can give a little bit more. Yeah, fair, very hard to understand. And then you're kind of always caught kind of explaining yourself or having to make people understand things they don't understand, and that's exhausting. Okay, I think I have one more question here. 1 second. Oh. Okay, here we go. What's the best piece of advice you've been given in your brain injury journey? And then again, feel free to post in the chat. I was hoping to see a fluttering of it gets better, or any pieces of advice.
My advice is Daryl here.
Hi, Daryl.
Is continue living your life as you have known it.
Yeah.
Or if you're changing personality, make a better you than you were before.
I love that. Yeah, I love that, Linda. If you've seen one brain injury, you've seen one brain injury. Don't compare yourself to anyone else. I love that. Yeah, Donna, that's great. And that kind of goes back to that like advocacy too, and making sure you're taking your notes that, if you forget something or you get home or, you had the bad weather in the car and by the time you get home, it's so overwhelming. It's nice to kind of have those notes that you can kind of refresh your memory and be like, oh, right, that's what they said. Okay, I had this question, and that's great. That's a really great resource for yourself. I love that. Accept yourself, discover who you are now, and embrace that. It's not my fault. Don't give up. Yeah, all beautiful.
There's another one. Enjoy your anniversary. I find it on the Brain Injury Association site. Celebrate your birthday for that day.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, and I think that goes back to too, like surrounding yourself with like that supportive group and kind of connecting with other people that have lived kind of similar experiences or have that understanding to kind of celebrate you and kind of all your overcoming and all that you're doing. Because sometimes just getting up and moving to the couch is a good day, and you need kind of people to kind of celebrate that. It's simple, but it's not easy. Yeah. Amen. Okay, well, that is all I had planned. I think, what are we at, about like 45 minutes or so? So again, I kind of put all my information here on the left, but I'll stop my share and then I'll just kind of post in the chat some of my information. Again, I just wanted to put some of the websites for some of the projects if anybody wanted to learn more. And then, if somebody left and had a few questions later, my email's there as well. Feel free to email me. Did anybody have any other questions? Did you learn anything new? I know that first half was a good half, and I motored through it there.
I've learned.
Good, I'm glad.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording, and if everybody wants, then they can ask questions off mute.